Well, it's real easy to tell that we live in a totally sex-saturated society. Today, sex it's glorified, and in its glorification, you see it. You just see it everywhere. And there are some harmful messages and some actually inaccurate messages that lead people to make stupid decisions for their life. And these bad decisions can result in people carrying around deep wounds and hurts and painful memories. But there's some great news for you about sex, is that God created sex to be good, to be great, to be wonderful, to be in the context of marriage. And that was God's design. Over the next several weeks, I want to share with you some of the whys behind God's boundaries of this sex message. So you can think of it either this way. Either the world is right when it comes to sex, and you can have sex with anyone, anywhere, anytime, or God's design is right, and His ways are better, even though He has some boundaries connected to sex. So either the world is right or God is right.
Freshman year in high school, I met Warren. I played basketball and he played basketball, so we had even more reasons to talk to each other and more reasons to see each other. And eventually, we just started hanging out. A timeline of our physical relationship would kind of be like, there was kissing, there was hoping to go out, holding hands and things like that. Maybe 6 months into the relationship, the conversation of what else we were going to do came up. We came to the point where we had a lot of alone time, and what I regret now is having sex with him. There wasn't peer pressure from any of my friends. I was never influenced by them, so our actions were mutual. We had the rights to, because we had gone out for a certain amount of time, because we said that we loved each other. The last time we had spoken about it before the actual date was us planning it out. What day of the week would it happen, when would his parents not be home, and things like that. It was after school. I had gotten on the bus with him, and we went to his house. No one was home. It was premeditated because I went there with certain things on my mind, just wondering how I was gonna feel before, during, after, who could ever find out if he was to open his mouth and tell anyone, who I would tell. After we had gotten to the point where we had crossed our boundaries of having sex, everything went downhill. We hardly talked, everything was awkward. I was afraid he would ask for it to happen again. I didn't want to put myself in a position where we could be alone, because I knew at that time in my life I was weak and I couldn't exactly put up a front. I knew exactly what it is that I was supposed to do and what it was that I wasn't supposed to do. I had put myself in a Christian environment. I also surrounded myself around people who had morals. I allowed myself to get into a relationship that I wasn't ready for. I didn't allow myself to put a set time to find out how much I needed to know about this particular person. Even though I regret doing it where I could have waited for my first time, I also know that there isn't gonna be a second.
I don't want you to live in a world of confusion, and neither does God. He loves you too much. So there are some things that Jesus said to His disciples about knowing the truth. In John chapter 8, He said, "You are my disciples if you obey my teachings, and you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free." And when it comes to the sexual messages, I want you to be set free. Now, I'm going to throw some things out there today, and you've got to decide in your heart if this is God's truth, or if it's the world's truth, or if there's another way that leads you to a more fulfilling life. I mean, let's consider some of the sexual themes that the world promotes. Like, first would be sex is no big deal. I mean, that's a message you find almost everywhere you go. The world says, hey, it's no big deal. And I kind of want to pause and say, no, it is a big deal. As a matter of fact, it would be like me saying that war is no big deal. I mean, the war of your generation, the war in Iraq, when it first broke out, I mean, every single news channel was showing it, and everybody was talking about the war, and lives were being shattered. But you looked at it a year or even a little bit later, and after it was saturated and all the images, people just don't seem to care that much anymore. And yet there were still people dying. And I realize that that's a radical illustration, but I think it's a lot like sex in our culture. That we've been so saturated with sex. You've grown up, every day of your life surrounded by sexual images and all types of mediums. And because it's so common, you are tempted to think it's just not that big of a deal. But it is a big deal. You know, there's another message of the world, and that sex is just a physical act. And a lot of people think that, the strongest sexual organ that you have is below your belt. And I want to tell you something different. The strongest sexual organ you have is right here. It's your mind. And there are some things that you're doing today that those of you who are sexually active, that I promise you, it's going to be stuck in your mind. It's going to haunt you for the rest of your life. I mean, you're never going to forget your sexual encounters. Now, you might want to dismiss that and say, forget you, old guy. I'm just going to live in the moment and do whatever I want. Okay, that's fine. It's your choice, and you're in charge of your sexual choices. But I'd love to meet with you after your first year of marriage and talk about what's happening in your mind. You're trying to be intimate with your new spouse, and what's going to happen is you can't shut off those sexual images that you've put into your mind. You've put them in either through actual sexual experiences, or you've put them in through virtual sex and pornography. Friend, sex is not just a purely physical act. It's highly emotional and spiritual too. I mean, you won't see that message in the media. In movies, you see a couple who, they innocently meet, they discover this attraction, they have sex, they break up eventually, and peacefully go their separate ways. I mean, the message of the world is that it's no big deal. It's just a physical, innocent act. And I'm suggesting it's just not so. And sometimes you hear another message. That other message is God is down on sex. The church is down on sex. And that comes from horribly uneducated people. Sex was God's idea. I mean, if you believe that God created humanity, then you got to believe that God created sex. There are other messages that people are hearing. I know another message that you hear a lot is everyone is doing it. And I want to let you know that not everyone is doing it. As a matter of fact, there's a lot more people who aren't doing it than are doing it. You know what statistics tell us? That about 40% of all high school students will graduate high school without ever having an intimate date. I mean, they might go on group dates or do a dance or something like that, but 40% will graduate without even having a one-on-one date. So you think you're the only one who's not having sex? Don't be fooled. You're not the only one. Now, with all this talk, you might be thinking that, it's just impossible to be pure. Actually, that's another message from the world. Not only that it's impossible, but why would you want to stay pure? I mean, is it impossible to stay pure? Well, no. As odd as this might sound, you don't need to have sex to live, to live a life. I mean, nobody's ever died from not having sex. You don't see, people crawling on the ground at school. You go, I need sex, I need sex. Now, some of you girls watching are thinking, well, that's exactly how my boyfriend acts. I'm sorry about that, okay? He's faking it. Let me give you some facts. You need oxygen, you need water, you need food to be alive. You don't have to have sex to be alive. It's not impossible to be pure.
I probably started dating when I was about I'd say 8th grade. So it started off with me actually wanting a girl who was modest and that was really nice and beautiful, but it started to turn into other things once I started going out with my last girlfriend. I'd set up a boundary just in my own mind that I didn't want to have sex, and I certainly didn't want to touch her at all. I just wanted to kiss her and hug her. So my boundary was just beyond kissing. I didn't really want to do anything. And I didn't think making out would go to anything else, but making out led to touching, and every single boundary I got to, I would just say to myself, it's not having sex, it's not getting to that point, it won't lead me there, but when we finally went through all the motions, all of them just led to just eventually having sex. I felt guilt because I had been raised in a Christian family and they taught me, don't have sex before marriage, and I was going to these Sunday school classes like everyone else, and they were telling us the same things, not to have sex before marriage and to follow God's ways, but she would comfort me and just say it was okay. So the further we got in the relationship, the more we talked about it and the more I felt natural. It turned into me not even caring that I was doing it. That relationship was just completely based on, at the end, it was completely based on having sex.
Now, let me tell you some things that you won't hear from the world. Okay? These are messages that the world doesn't shout out like the other ones that I talked about. The first is this, that your sexual decisions will leave lifelong memories. Some of you are sitting there and you're in love and you hear that and you think, well, gosh, that's actually good news because I love my boyfriend and my girlfriend and I want to remember this forever. We're going to get married. Well, I'm sure your feelings are very strong. I don't want to play those down, but you know that about, I don't know, less than 2% of all high school relationships last beyond college. So, you know, if you're choosing to have sex with everybody you love, you're probably going to be in and out of love at least, 5 or 6 times before you get married. So then you're going to have had sexual relationships with 5 or 6 different people before you, that's a lot of emotional baggage that you've just stored into God's gift that we call a mind. And your sexual decisions are going to have lifelong memories. You know, there's another message that the world doesn't tell you that I want to make sure you know, and it's this: your sexual decisions can have lifelong consequences. And I realize that some of you in here are feeling a little bit uncomfortable because you are sexually involved or you have been sexually involved. And let me tell you, and we'll talk about this in a little bit, is God is a God of forgiveness. God wants to take anything that is wrong and He wants to make it right, to wipe away that slate. And you might say to me, Doug, can God forgive me for everything I've ever done sexually? Well, yeah. God is about fresh starts and can totally forgive you. But it doesn't mean that you're not going to have memories or consequences. I just want to be clear on that. I don't want to try to scare you with, lifelong consequences like statistics on disease. But you know what? Do your own homework. Sexually transmitted disease is reality. The statistics are staggering. A lot of teenagers have diseases that will be with them forever. And I know a lot of people say, well, it's never going to happen to me. Well, it happens. And it's because we make uninformed decisions. And sex is a huge decision for anybody, really, of any age. Here's another message that you don't hear. You don't hear that the best sex really is found in marriages who waited. Now, I can give you my opinion based on counseling, and I'll teach you what the Bible says, but for those of you who want facts, the most authoritative research ever done in America on sexuality was done at the University of Chicago. It was the National Health and Social Life Survey, and it came to this very interesting, but in my opinion, not surprising conclusion. And it said, in real life, married sex is actually the one that satisfies people the most. Studies show that married people are significantly more likely to say that their sex life makes them feel satisfied and loved and thrilled and wanted and taken care of. The faithfully married are also the least likely to report sex as making them feel sad or anxious or worried or scared, afraid, guilty, dirty, you name it.
I had a friend and she had told me that her and her boyfriend were having sex. It was, oh my gosh, it was so great, you gotta try it. She made it sound so enticing that it was just like, wow, I wanna do that too. And then I was like, guys talk about it like it's nothing, so it must be nothing. Everybody must be doing it. And I was like, oh, well, that's how you get guys. Cause that's what they like. My freshman year of high school, I had a friend, and I had liked him ever since middle school. I was practically in love with him. And he asked me if I wanted to come over, and I did. Just one thing led to the next, and I lost my virginity. And I look back on that day and just can't believe it. I put myself in that situation for that to happen. I thought it was something that I would like, and I did for the most part until I didn't get anything out of it that I thought I was gonna get. I didn't understand that, oh, just because that happened, that we're still the same, how does that work out? I thought if I did that, you'd want to be my boyfriend. And he was like, no, you're basically just another notch in my headboard. Come on now. I was attending a youth group, and we did have this sex lesson, why you should wait. I really didn't ever want to stand up and just be like, well, I have sex, because I was scared. I didn't want him to go to my parents and tell him, and then my parents be like, oh my gosh, Emily, why did you do that? Most of my friends did have boyfriends, and I wanted to feel what they were feeling. I wanted that sense of security they had. Yes, they were having sex with their boyfriends, but they were their boyfriends. They were together. They spent every day together, you know? Like, I wanted that. It was very straining on me emotionally because I would get attached to a guy and then, you know, he'd ask me, he'd be like, oh, you know, I really like you, but will you have sex with me? And so I'd be like, okay, thinking that that would keep him around longer. 2 weeks later, I would be left with nothing. It's a blow to your self-esteem to be walking down the street and have a guy walk up to you and be like, I know who you are. You're so easy. Like, no girl wants to be known as the high school slut. I constantly set myself up for disappointment by going for the same type of guys that I knew that all they were gonna wanna do was sleep with me and then leave me. But I thought, by the slim chance I may get one that would just, I don't know, magically fall in love with me.